I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Welcome to the February 15th, 2018 meeting of the Philipstown Planning Board. We have a couple of public hearings tonight. I'd like to just mention that if you would like to speak at any point during the public hearings this evening, you need to sign up on the sheet in the back of the room. So first of all, we're going to call the roll.
Okay. Kim Connor.
Here.
Neil Toman.
Here.
David Hardy.
Here.
Neil Zuckerman.
Here.
Dennis Gavin.
Here.
Peter Lewis.
Here.
And Andy Moranti is absent.
Okay. First order of business is the approval of the January 18th, 2018 minutes. Does anybody have any additions, corrections? No? Okay, so I'll take a motion to approve the minutes.
I'll make that motion.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? I vote aye. Okay. The second item of business is the return of escrow for Kristen E. Sorensen, 1000 Old Albany Post Road in Garrison. And Ron and Steve, there are no outstanding bills or anything?
No.
Any opposition to? No? So I'll take a motion to approve the return of escrow to Kristen Sorensen.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? No. Okay. So now we have two public hearings tonight. Well, we're supposed to, first I want to say that there was supposed to be a workshop meeting tonight, but because our chair was unable to be here tonight and we'd like him to participate in the workshop, that workshop will take place at the March meeting. So anyone who wanted to observe that can come back next month. We were supposed to have 3 public hearings tonight, but one of the applicants, Robert Miller Alltech Service Center, is ill, so they've asked that we push that back to the March meeting as well. So we have 2 public hearings, and I'd like to start with SEJE Realty, LLC, 1510 Route 9. And do you want to read the notice?
Oh. Minor site plan, the applicant is seeking approval of an additional use, light industrial steel fabrication, while retaining existing single-family residential use, the existing off-street parking, and some of the existing storage. Applicant also seeks to add a limited amount of outside storage as part of the light industrial use. Tax map number 82.7-14.
So Glenn, would you like to tell us about it?
Yes, Glenn and Watson from Beatty and Watson for SEJE Realty. The property, as the members of the board knows, is on Route 9. It's just north of and opposite Appalachian Market. It's opposite Cross Road. There for quite a few years, I'm going to say 20, I don't know exactly, there's been a trucking yard. CJ Trucking has been there. And there is some outdoor storage. There is some contained storage on the site. There is some parking on the site. Mr. Abdu and his company are buying this piece of property. Property is already improved with a commercial building that was used by the trucking company and there is a residential unit attached to that. That will stay. The trucking company will still have some parking spaces, but will largely be removed from the site. The parking, which is actually used by the Appalachian Trail employees during the day or during their shifts, will remain. Mr. Abdu runs a light industrial, a steel fabrication company. We met with we had a pre-app with the planning board and the building inspector, Mr. Gaynor. Been determined that what we're doing is a light industrial use. the fabrication will take, the company will take in materials, they will fabricate their stairs or their platforms, and then they will take it off-site. There will be 2 or 3 employees. There is some, to the southeast of the building, there is a high retaining wall. We've put the outdoor storage on racks behind the building, so it won't be visible really from anywhere, because you will look over it as you come up the old Highland Turnpike, and it will be behind the building as you look in from Route 9. It's a fairly significant stand of trees at the entrance. The entrance will stay the same. At the exit, up in the north corner of the building and along Old Highland Turnpike, there is existing landscaping has been put in. As the planning board may have noted, since Mr. Abdu has taken possession on the strength of his contract, he has cleaned up the site considerably. There has been some questions by the board with regard to how the finishes apply to the metal. The finish is all applied with a paintbrush out of paint cans. There's no spray booth. There's no paint spraying involved in the operation. There will be a little bit of outdoor activity in the better weather, but for the most part, everything will happen within the existing garage. There's no physical changes planned. The septic system is in place. The well is in place. There is a stream running through the property. We are not going to encroach any further on towards the stream than the existing improvements. So by and large, there's nothing physically happening with the property except for the increase in the outdoor storage. And in fact, that will be offset by some of the loss of the removal of some of the trailers and trucking that had gone on in the future. That's it in maybe a big nutshell, but I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Go ahead, Neil.
Thanks, Glenn. We are obviously always supportive of business and have been for many years as a planning board. When we looked at this site 3-4 years ago for a very different purpose, which is more of a consumer-facing car wash, we had a discussion about drainage of the or runoff from the incredible amount of water that the car wash would use and rolling into the creek. This is clearly not the same situation, but when the discussion at the site walk was done, we did discuss the notion of paints, whether applied through industrial tools or paintbrushes, the notion of how that paint is captured so it does not enter into the water supply. So that's still a conversation that we at least raised physically, and I'd like to see what our thoughts are since then.
Mr. Abdu? Oh, there you are. Painting is inside or outside? Painting's inside?
We paint, we be like primer pieces.
No. Come here. Come
Step
on.
over here to the microphone. Thank you.
The question is, where do you paint inside or outside?
If any paint will be small partial, will be indoor. As if I do I-beam or anything, those never been painted, because when we set it on the side, it will be fireproof. So if you fireproof, you're not allowed to paint material. So if I do, it will be small thing. And if you don't want the paint, hell with it. We won't have it.
I think our question isn't so much
I'm just-
whether you will have paint, but how you're going to dispose of the paintbrushes, the residue, if you're going to be using paint thinner on your paintbrushes, where does that go?
No, if my brush is brand new, I use it once or twice. I put them back in an empty gallon, have it thinner, so it stay fresh and moist.
How do you get rid of the thinner?
The thinner?
The thinner in the spent cans.
Okay, the spray can, I take him to my supplier. I move him out of the yard. I take him out of my supplier. And they do what they're doing. There's-
I guess the point is, Ron, on notes on the plan, how do we ensure that it's clarified that paint would be only used indoors and prevented from any outside exposure?
I hear the board's concerns, and I'll work with the design consultant to make sure appropriate plat notes are placed on the project.
Wonderful, thank you, Ron.
Any other questions? So I have a question. I noticed when we were on the site visit that there is a large, well, I have a couple of questions. So there's a large connection of containers? Yes, that has a stovepipe in it and no windows. And we'd just like to know. Yeah, we'd like to know what goes on there and, you know, what that is.
That's a tenant that the owner, the seller has in there, and we will have that removed. But we'll be happy to put a note on the plat for that.
Okay, and there was.
I can't give you a direct answer because, to be perfectly honest, I don't know what goes on inside there.
Okay. There were also containers at the north end, or a shed at the north end that a landscaping company was using. Will that activity continue? That's what we were told.
He would prefer that to continue. It supplies for the landscape company.
Okay, and there were also two tractor trailer
Here.
north of the building.
North?
Yep,
Park trailers on wheels.
yes.
They will stay.
And they're also related to another business, correct?
They're related to the seller's business, I believe.
We were told that that there was a charity in Peekskill that used them?
Yeah, that's correct. That was, I'd been told that a while ago, that the charity stores their donations there, I guess is what's happening.
Okay, so my question to you, Ron, and to Steve, I guess, is that, you know, it seems like there are several businesses going on here. And so for site plan approval, what are we approving? Are we approving the light industrial, or are we approving, you know, renting space to the Appalachian Market, renting space to the landscaping company,
Well,
et
it's an
cetera?
amended site plan approval, and the only amendment to their site plan that they're seeking is in regard to the steel fabrication business. I don't know if the other items that are on there are pre-existing, or if they're illegal, or what the deal is. If you're concerned about it and you think there may be illegal uses, you don't want to approve a site plan on account of that, you can ask for a compliance letter from the building inspector. He can go out and say, everything's in, you know, either pre-existing or in accordance with what's approved now, or you can say these trailers shouldn't be here, or I don't know, whatever it is he's going to say. But if you want a letter from the building inspector as to answer your question, as far as the site plan goes, all you're being asked to approve is the amendment to the steel fabrication business, and there's really, other than informational purposes, as they might impact that, no reason to go outside that site plan approval and say, oh, there are other uses, I don't want to look at them too.
If any of them, I have no objection to that. If any of them are deemed to be illegal, we'll stipulate that they'll be removed and we'll remove them before the CO.
So what does the board think about that? Do we want to ask the building inspector to give us a compliance letter?
That makes sense, and this seemed like a fairly hodgepodge collection of buildings, ramshackle styles, and generally, if we have the opportunity, I think it's a good thing for us to do to examine properties. I think back to, on 9D, the gas station across from the former Garrison Market, and we had an opportunity to clean up some of its operations and put some screening in, and I thought that was a good benefit for the community, so I'd support that notion.
Anybody else?
I'll make sure that happens.
Okay, so do we need to vote on that, Steve?
Well, you could vote on it, of course, and make it a formal requirement. You could just ask the applicant to submit it as part of his application. My understanding is we didn't get out, I think, the 239M referral on this yet.
That's right.
So we've got to put it over to next month anyway. So if you want to make it formal and vote on it, that's great. If not, Glenn's already said that they would get it, however you want to proceed. If you
Okay.
vote on it, they have to give it to you, and look at it that way.
So would anyone like to make a motion to call for a vote?
I'll make a motion to call for a vote.
Second? We don't have to move that, we don't have to move that? Yeah. Okay, so all in favor of asking for a letter of compliance from the building inspector? I vote aye. All opposed? Okay. So we'll add that to your list, Ron. So we'll need to make so I guess now,
You haven't invited the public yet.
Right. We'd like to ask Ron to speak about this?
No new materials have come in. There's a prior technical review I had issued to the board last month, and there's still technical issues that the applicant, his consultant will have to resolve as part of any,
The plan that's here actually has several of them on there. We're still waiting for some information from the health department regarding the septic and wells. As soon as that comes in, we'll get it to you.
thank you.
And we can talk to you regarding any additional notes.
Right,
Okay.
and we'll have to resolve the issue with the referrals that have to go out.
Right. So at this point, I think we can ask if anyone is here from the public to speak about this application? No? Okay. In that case, I think we can close the public hearing.
That's the board's pleasure. You can, if you want to keep it open until you receive the additional letter, you can. If you want to close it for everything except for the additional letter, you can. It's up to the board.
You want to make that? A second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed?
Thank you.
Okay.
I think that we have, the issues we talked about are no problem. We'll take care of them. Would you consider asking Mr. Gaynor to prepare a resolution for consideration next month?
Well, we still need to make a 239M referral, is that right?
That'll be back.
I'd kind of like to be able to, I mean, we can ask him to prepare it, but, that doesn't, we may still
Well,
want to talk
if we
about it next
satisfy those
month.
things we talked about and we come back, we're just delaying it another month. If we can get, if it could be ready, we can, and if, obviously, if we don't fulfill those conditions, you're not going to pass it.
Okay. Would anyone like to make a motion to, first of all, to make a referral to county planning, a 239M referral?
I'll make that motion.
Neil, second?
Second.
David, all in favor?
Aye.
I vote aye. Would anyone like to make a motion to direct Ron to prepare a resolution for approval for our next meeting, provided the conditions are met and the approval comes in from county?
I'll make that motion.
Peter, second?
Second that.
All in favor? I vote aye. All opposed? No.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Glenn. Okay. Moving right along. We have a continuation of last month's public hearing for the Hudson Highland Reserve, and I'd like to ask Ann to read the public hearing notice.
Okay. It's a continuation from January 18th, 2018. The 210.1 acre tract involving 6 separate tax parcels is located on the east side of Route 9 between Horton Road and East Mountain Road North. The eastern edge of the property has frontage on East Mountain Road South. The largest part of the property, 194.5 acres, is located in the rural residential zoning district, of which 153.5 acres are also in the open space overlay district. There are 11.1 acres of the property in the most westerly part of the tract with frontage along Route 9 that are located in the industrial manufacturing zone. The remainder of the property, 4.5 acres, is located in the highway commercial zone along Route 9. The application for preliminary approval is being processed as a conservation subdivision pursuant to the standards contained within 175-20 of the zoning ordinance. A minimum of 154 acres of the overall tract is proposed to remain undeveloped and protected as open space. The applicant seeks preliminary approval of a subdivision that includes 25 residential lots, each containing approximately 1 acre. The 25 lots will be served by individual wells and community wastewater treatment facilities. An equestrian center is also proposed. The 4.5 acre parcel, which is improved with an office building, will remain a separate but smaller lot, making room for the proposed access road.
Okay. Thank you, Ann. So last month, we had the first part of the public hearing. The applicant spoke, members of the community spoke, The board asked questions. The applicant spoke again. So tonight, I think, and Steve, correct me if I'm wrong, it would be appropriate to, do we start with the public speaking since we've already had presentations, or?
That's what I would recommend. If you'd like to, just because there may be some people here who weren't at the last public hearing, have a very, very brief recap of the project by the applicant, that would be fine. But if you want to jump right into the public comments, I think that would be the way to. I don't think we should have a rehash of what we had last month, though.
Sure. So Glenn, do you want to briefly state for this particular group a history of the project?
The public notice really had a fair amount of information. It's 210 acres. It's 6 different parcels that were accumulated. The property has frontage along Route 9. This is the former Pemcourt building, was rebuilt. The Clove Creek crosses under Route 9 here. This is east up towards the north end of the property. The property has frontage on East Mountain Road North. The property also has frontage on East Mountain Road South, towards the southeast part of the property. The plan is to build a road from Route 9 up the hill and into the property and build a main kind of road into the equestrian center. There will be some houses located along that road. There will be a cul-de-sac road that will service a few houses. There will be actually 3 cul-de-sac roads that will service some of the houses. There's a total of 25 residential structures, one of which already exists. There's the design of the subdivision was to try to keep as much of the southeast portion of the property undeveloped, keep as much as possible of the land immediately adjacent to Clove Creek on the west side undeveloped, some of the upper slopes behind the houses on the east side undeveloped. There is a 5+ acre, almost 6 acre pond on the property at the southwest corner. That is slated, there will be a conservation easement around it. That is slated as mentioned in the EAF, as discussed in the EAF, I should say, for professional restoration and management. It will be a individual 1 acre lots for each of the houses. There will be a homeowners association to govern the property, to maintain the roads, to maintain the common septic system, which will be located near the equestrian center, to maintain the sewage system, to maintain the lake, and to enforce the rules. Of course, for those of you who don't know about homeowners associations or aren't familiar with them, they're essentially a private governmental body that makes rules and enforces rules. They have the power to levy dues on the members. All of the homeowners must be members. They must participate, and they essentially fund all the services with a common fund that is built up by the collection of dues and assessments. There's a lot of material with regard to conservation analysis. We spent a couple of years getting that ready. There's even more material with regard to the environmental assessment form, which is the subject of tonight's public hearing. And we hope to move forward. If there's any questions you want to point my way, I'd be happy to try to answer them. And just to let you know, Mr. O'Rourke and Mr. Gross and 2 people from Fractal and Ms. Gambles are here to help answer any questions you might have. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so if anyone hasn't yet signed in to speak, please sign in. And Stephanie, if you don't mind, after you sign that, if you could bring that up here so we know who wants to speak, that would be great.
Procedural question. So I sent a letter with many questions. Do I have to?
You have to sign up to speak. Everybody who's going to speak needs to sign up. Yes. Well, the list is back there, so Neil's gone to get the list, so. So we're just collecting the last few names here, and then we'll get started. Thank you. So just before we get started, there are a couple of things. Please try to keep your comments relevant and to the point. Once we're done with this public hearing, most of you are here for this particular public hearing, but we will still have business to transact afterwards. So if you could, when you're leaving, quietly exit the building and take any additional conversations outside, we'd appreciate that. The first person on this list is Lynn Rogoff, R-O-G-O-F-F, 464 East Mountain Road South.
Can you hear me? Okay, great. So I was invited to attend because my property is on the border of this property on East Mountain Road South. This is my property right here. And I was unable to attend any of the planning board meetings until tonight. But I did attend the Hudson Highland Land Trust Educational Forum last week. And at that time, Ms. Smith, speaking for the Hudson Highland Land Trust, brought to light that the regulations for the livestock and the recreation part of this subdivision, the rules and regulations have not been promulgated into the code. So I'm here to speak to that tonight. My family has owned this parcel for 37 years. We've been here in Cold Springs since 1981. When we first bought this land, the land up there was zoned 1 acre. And then through the comprehensive plan, the zoning was changed from 1 acre to 3 acre zoning to finally 5 acre zoning for everybody up on this part of the mountain. So anyone who owns land up there, we cannot subdivide, any of us anymore. So, be that as it may, in general, my neighbors and I, all the people that live up here by Esselborn Road and the East Mountain Road, have lived here peacefully, and we live contiguous to each other in the open source part of this land, without fences, and without dividing our property. For decades, we've lived this way. And this allows the countless animals that are deemed to be part of this open space conservation area to move freely between this parcel and the water source, which is the pond. And we often see them moving across here to get water and then back to where they live and habitat and nest and breed. And this includes foxes, coyotes, deer, rabbits, turkeys, and amphibians of all kinds. They are free to walk across my neighbor and my open space without impediment. So my concern this evening is to discover the details of the Hudson Highland intentions for the livestock and recreation use of the open space, and the use of East Mountain Road South, because how do they plan to use East Mountain Road South, and how do they plan to use egress for East Mountain Road North, which goes through the entire property. So those people who live on East Mountain Road South use East Mountain Road North to get to the north part of our community. And those who want to go to south will use the south. Now, the East Mountain Road North is a very steep, windy, narrow, dark road. And many people on there are have countless almost accidents or real accidents on that road. And it's only in the last decade or so that it's had hardtop. When I first moved up here, this road was not usable or passable. In any case, my question to this esteemed panel of people who are here tonight is the prior owner, the Lyons property, which is, I may have brought this special thing here, the Lyons property, which was built, I think it comes out around here, somewhere around here, the egress. Mr. Lyons bought this parcel. He built a road, and then he couldn't find septic fields. He cleared a lot of land, and then he found out that he couldn't build anything, even though he was Mr. Lyons. So it ends up there is an egress here from this parcel onto East Mountain Road South. And this parcel here, this East Mountain Road North egress, is a very steep, windy road that I have been observing Hudson Highlands building the last year as I drive down East Mountain Road North. And I gather, and I don't really know, that they plan to use this road that goes through the entire parcel for the horses to come out here. And East Mountain Road South is a school bus route. East Mountain Road North is not a school bus route, but it is very steep and windy, and their egress comes very steeply down onto East Mountain Road North. The bottom line is our concern about what is going to happen with 40-plus horses sharing the road with the community, which has not really been addressed. Nor the other concern, when I studied their proposal from the architects online, the portfolio, it shows a big equestrian center that with renderings of horses with their riders going through forested roads. I don't know, I haven't really heard anybody discuss what's going to happen with the horses and the riders in the open space. So I'm here to find out. And then this blue line here, blue line, you see? This blue line indicates that there's got a proposed stone walls. So are they proposing to build stone walls?
That's a stream.
Where are the stone walls?
That's around the pond.
So there's no stone walls here?
Well,
You're not planning any stone walls?
No.
Oh, okay. So I was not really clear about whether or not that is good news. But obviously the horses, their intention for the horses is to go riding, I would imagine, not just to go in circles around the property. So is the plan here to bring the horses up and have them egress onto East Mountain Road South and East Mountain Road North, or to come up and suddenly we will discover horses and riders appearing on our property up here? And so that is really my major concern. And that we don't really know if this open space parcel will be used for the horses and riders to have trails. that has not really been clearly promulgated here. So that is my concern for this evening, and I thank the esteemed panel for giving me time to speak.
Thank you.
Just ask you to spell your last name?
Rogoff.
Thank you.
Thank you. So what we're going to do is we're going to ask the applicant to address, no, Glenn, at the end. We're going to let everybody ask their questions and then have you address the answers at the end.
Maybe if we address some of these questions, we could avoid other people.
Maybe, but, we're going to be here, if we go back and forth, we're going to be here all night. So, it's a long night, and I think we're going to move forward. So the next person on this list is Dave Morandy, Merandy, 39 East Mountain Road North, 15 Academy, Cold Spring.
Good evening. As you cited, I am on the...
If you want to move that microphone, you can,
Okay.
you might want to look at Cecilia over here.
Is that okay?
Sure.
I live on the, well, I don't live on there now. I have property on the East Mountain Road in this area right here. It's just up from right now, the driveway to the applicant, one of the applicant's properties. As you may or may not remember, I was the liaison to the planning board when when I was on the town board, when this project first came to being, or first came to the board. And my first thoughts when I looked at this was, this isn't a conservation subdivision. I was thinking of all of the restrictions that are on this property, being familiar with it, and just with our codes, how much property you would have to eliminate because it's not buildable, or there's streams going through it, or there's the lake on it. So I believe that the bottom line is that this doesn't, I believe the intention for the conservation subdivision was to actually give open space and to keep the housing in a tight area, obviously. But with all the restrictions, and as you can see the slopes and how steep they are, that we really don't need one there. We don't need a conservation easement on this because it would be limited anyway, just by the the geography of it limits it to so many houses. So what I'd like you to consider is, and if you haven't already, is of just using our regular zoning codes and plan, zoning, what they would actually be able to build here and where they would be able to build it. Because if you eliminate all of this property that's not buildable, then I think that it's actually more environmental friendly and more the reason why this was incorporated into our new zoning than doing an easement and the way that what they're trying to do here. I just don't believe that this development and clustering it in this gives you anything more. In fact, it's giving you more residents, it's giving you more building that's in a tighter area, and I believe that the open space that they're saying is like a gift or something, that's good for the general public, really would be there anyway. So what I'm asking is if you'd please just, if you haven't already, please just using our regular codes, not an easement, eliminating all the areas you couldn't build on, what we'd be left with, and to see which would be more environmental friendly. Because I believe with the number of houses that you would, be restricted to with our zoning, that you would have more open space, and I think it would be more to the intention of the law. So thank you very much, and thank you for keeping the public hearing open. I do appreciate it.
Thanks, Dave. Next, Julia Famularo, Famularo, 59 Esselborn Road, Cold Spring.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for the considerable time and effort you've spent putting in looking at this project. I'm here for one question, and that is about the water table. I want to know how much water is going to be sucked out of the aquifer that we all count on, and if it is sustainable for all the residents who rely on that water.
Thank you. Richard Butensky, Butensky, 407 East Mountain Road South, Cold Spring.
Thank you. Thank you for allowing me to speak. I believe the concept of the conservation subdivision is a good one and would like to see this town's first applicant succeed. This project, however, in its current form, seems to me to be anathema to the law's purposes. The conservation subdivision law was enacted to preserve land and resources that would otherwise not be protected in a standard subdivision. I cannot for the life of me see how, in this case, a standard subdivision wouldn't be preferable to this one, and I find that quite discouraging. This plan barely even attempts to seriously protect Ulmer Pond and Clove Creek. A standard subdivision would have yielded 8 or 9 houses used by less than 50 people. This project would expose a similar parcel of land to the impact and waste of 100 residents, plus outside customers to a commercial equestrian operation, plus attendees of equestrian events, plus 40 horses, plus daily truck traffic to bring in feed and truck out waste, plus horse urine with no plan for mitigation, plus the waste outside the stalls that will get washed into the creek and the pond, plus pesticides. And while the horse trails were removed from the plan, what stops them from reappearing after the fact, or people simply bringing their horses into the woods without official trails? Do the members of the board truly understand the impact of the largest commercial horse operation in town, perhaps the county, on nearby parkland trails and local roads? Unless land use is constrained beyond what is currently required, much, if not all, of the preserved forest will be destroyed either by the horses themselves or on behalf of the horses through the clearing of trees and underbrush. The conflict here is that if the land is so constrained, 40 horses will not have adequate room to live humanely. While the applicant and his representatives seem to view this plan as an entitlement gained through the purchase of undevelopable land, this is clearly at odds with the intention of the conservation subdivision law. The board is obliged to reject any plan submitted under the conservation law that does not actually conserve land and resources. I respectfully urge the planning board to use its power to defend the essence of this law. Thank you.
Okay. Next, we have Noel Kropf, K-R-O-P-F, 11 Lake Celeste Drive, Garrison. Richard?
Hi, thank you for allowing me to comment. I also have, I'm concerned about the fact that this this development is on Clove Creek Aquifer, and I think that the 40-horse operation poses a risk to the drinking water, and I also think it would be a horrible first usage of the conservation easement, the conservation subdivision provision in our code, if it were to, in fact, to result in a less conservation of the land in that area than we would have been otherwise. It would be some sort of a travesty. I understand that the law may be written to allow it somehow, but that would be very, very unfortunate outcome in my opinion. Thank you.
Okay. Next, Andy Galler, G-A-L-L-E-R, 170 Old Albany Post Road in Garrison.
Thank you. I'm here on behalf of the Conservation Board. Our chairperson, Mark Galiso, was not able to attend. And first off, I believe your chairperson is out having surgery. On behalf of the Conservation Board, I'd like to wish him a speedy recovery. I am going to read our memo. It'll take me about 6 minutes or so, verbatim, with one exception. I will mention once the Conservation Board and Natural Resource Review Officer. After that, I will change it to we. It's easier for me to read. Ori Hudson Highland Reserve subdivision project. Philipstown Conservation Board, additional comments dated February 15th. Dear Chairman Moranti and the Planning Board, the Conservation Board respectfully submits the below comments on the revised EAS as a response to Keen and Bean letter dated December 5, 2017, and to provide more clarity to our previous comments and overall position on the current proposal. The following major topics still have not been addressed in full to our satisfaction. 1. The Keen and Bean letter dated December 5th states the goals and spirits of what a conservation subdivision encompasses, but is not codified. However, the Conservation Board and the Natural Resource Review Officer believes our comments are fully consistent with the conservation goals and guidelines presented in our adopted Philipstown Comprehensive Plan and Natural Resource and Open Space Protection Plan. 2. We believe the current project plan will significantly impact the site, primarily through forest fragmentation. We acknowledge the current layout of roads and structures has been selected due to the location of preferred buildable areas on level terrain that have been previously disturbed, and some fragmentation is inevitable. Reducing the lot size or number of structures that surround the pond will provide a wider connecting habitat corridor for the undeveloped areas that will help ameliorate the impacts of fragmentation, provide a higher level of protection of water resources found on the site, and produce improved conservation results overall. 3. The Keen and Bean letter states that the Hudson Highland Reserve proposal was designed in accordance with the principles recommended in the publication, Guidelines for Managing Wood Thrush and Scarlet Tanager Habitat in the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic Regions. And this is published by High Branch Conservation Services of Hartland, Vermont. This is a debatable statement, as this publication recommends clustering near existing roadways and minimizing the footprint of residential and commercial development. The applicant is proposing a new road system and large commercial equestrian center. 4. The CB's concerns of an edge effect, impacts of the proposed large equestrian facility in the adjacent cul-de-sac on areas having the highest conservation value on the site have not been addressed. The Environmental Law Institute's 2003 publication, Conservation Thresholds for Land Use Planners, recommend that sufficient suitable habitat buffers should exceed 300 meters from all edge peripheries, and that the area within the buffer should not be counted as suitable habitat provided for the species conservation. We direct the applicant to review the document, and we've provided a link. We suggest that the size and location of the equestrian facility be reconsidered as its proposed location currently serves as a naturalized and important buffer that will protect the area of the highest conservation value from degradation. 5. We again request more information on stormwater and wastewater management plans. We believe the scale of the proposal warrants this request. We are not requesting fully completed plans for the applicant, but rather intentions, concepts, or examples of environmentally responsible methods that are appropriate for a conservation subdivision. Effective and well-designed stormwater and wastewater management are essential for the long-term protection of water resources on site and for Clove Creek, and should not be added to the end of the design proposal, but rather integrated throughout the planning process. We again acknowledge the applicant's efforts to date. We dispute the claim made by the applicant's representatives that our recommendations for a positive declaration under CEQA is far-reaching. Rather, we believe our concerns reflect our high standard that attempts to uphold town policy and balance the protection of our local natural resources with the needs of the landowner, particularly for parcels within open space conservation and other relevant overlay districts, and for a precedent-setting project of this scale. The Conservation Board takes responsibility very seriously, which includes protecting the streams and wetlands of Philipstown, as well as advising other boards on how to lessen the potential impacts of disturbances on environmentally sensitive lands, such as steep slopes and matrix forests. Our board has a long history of working cooperatively with landowners to try to accommodate the development goals. This is the mandate given to our board. We note again, however, that the proposed conservation subdivision now under consideration is the first such development of this type ever proposed in Philipstown. And as such, we believe it is imperative that we make the right decisions, not only for the applicant, but also for the people of Philipstown. In conclusion, we again recommend the Planning Board, 1, issue a positive declaration in regard to the CEQA process, and 2, require an environmental impact statement to be prepared by the applicant and their agents to ensure potential environmental impacts of the proposal are better planned and fully considered. We look forward to continuing to work with the applicant and resolve outstanding issues. Thank you.
Thank you.
Andy, do we get that letter?
We have it.
Yes, we have that one.
I'll give you mine.
No. Thank you, Mr. Gallagher.
Okay, the next person up is Susan Hyatt, Hyatt, 55 Esselborn Road.
Good evening. I have a brief statement for the board, which you may have seen. I actually emailed it out to you all this afternoon. And then I have a question for the applicant. My husband and I moved to Philipstown approximately 2 months ago. We're up on Esselborn on East Mountain. And the proposed subdivision comes very close to our backyard. We chose this area intentionally and specifically for a number of reasons. The natural and peaceful surroundings, the quiet and privacy, and the joy of sharing our space with varied wildlife. It appears that this subdivision does not follow the intent of the comprehensive plan and would be a detriment to residents by affecting all of the aforementioned benefits. We are extremely disappointed that this project is still under consideration in the guise of a conservation subdivision, which it clearly is not. It is our hope that the board will take the recommendation of the Hudson Highlands Land Trust and the many residents of this community that would be adversely affected. Thank you. And my question is, what is the plan to mitigate the traffic impact on an already heavily traveled, poorly lit, and dangerous road? I'm referring to Route 9. However, if East Mountain Road South and North are still being considered as access routes, obviously those roads as well.
Thank you. Next up is Bettina Utz, UTZ, 345 East Mountain Road North.
Thank you for hearing us today. I also have a question for the applicant. I live on East Mountain Road North, and we go up and down this road every day, multiple times a day. My question is if this road here is actually an access road or emergency only, since it's already difficult to get onto Route 9 here. And the other question was, is there an amount of cars that you can tell me is planned here for the parking lot?
We're going to have them address that after. They're going to speak after, so you can ask your questions. And then...
Oh, since there was a reaction, I thought. Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, I mean, it's been said before. I would also like to urge the board to consider a conventional subdivision. I think it's more beneficial for the land and the people in Philipstown. If a conservation subdivision is considered, I would like to ask the board to cluster the homes further, reduce the amount of houses, move the homes away from the pond, and also limit the size of the equestrian center. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Robert J. Hilbert, Hilpert, 2 Peacock Way in Garrison. Is Mr. Hilbert here?
I think he was here for the Miller application.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Next is Michael Clemente, 19 Twin Bridges Road in Garrison. Is that correct? Yeah, already covered. Okay, thank you. Next is Susan Anspach, ANSPACH, 516 East Mountain Road South.
Thank you.
Come step up to the mic.
I really just have a process question. I was here at the last meeting last month, and the North Highlands Fire Department raised a number of issues, and I wondered if they've been answered, and if so, if they're recorded somewhere, because I wasn't able to find them online.
Not yet.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
They have sent us a letter saying they're working on it, basically.
Oh, the applicant is working
No,
on the
fire
questions.
department has
Okay.
codified what was said last time in a letter.
Okay, I'm just looking for some of the, besides the residents, there were questions raised by the fire department that I think should be available to the public as well, so that we have access to those answers. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Next, Stephen Loria, Loria, 541 East Mountain Road North.
So first, I just want to say, excuse me for my attire. I came from the gym tonight, would have liked to dress a little nicer, but I thought it was important for me to come here because this is an important project to speak of and then try to influence you against this proposal as it currently exists. So I wrote a letter. I sent it to all of the planning board members as well as to the town board. Hopefully you have received that. But I just wanted to highlight some key points in there. And I'm going to read a little bit of it and also just give some highlights here. So again, obviously my comments are on this particular proposal for the Hudson Highlands Reserve Conservation Subdivision Project. I start my letter with, I start with my belief that the conservation subdivision law is designed to achieve what it was, it was designed to achieve what it was intended to do based on the comprehensive plan. Therefore, I ask the Philipstown should do everything in its power using the code to ensure undesired development as clearly outlined in the comprehensive plan does not occur and set a precedent for future development. Unfortunately, this project, as it currently exists, does not seem congruous to the law's purposes. The law was enacted to preserve land and resources that would otherwise not be protected in a standard subdivision, and any attempt made to try to fit it into a conservation subdivision is disappointing at best. I go on to say a standard subdivision would result in only 8 or 9 houses. It appears that the applicant, in order to circumvent the intention of the law and the plan, bought additional property that was already protected in order to achieve his results. This project's impacts to what the plan and the law is intended to protect does not just the opposite. The plan calls for an astonishing 25 houses plus an equestrian facility with 40 horses, with additional buildings, the horse manure waste from the horses, as well as potentially a large number of visitors to the facility, has material negative impact on our natural resources and does not preserve land, which are, again, the intentions of both the plan and the zoning code. And personally, by the way, I am impacted. I live on East Mountain Road. I don't adjoin any of this property. I live on East Mountain Road North. Personally, I'm impacted by traffic, but I'm also, my biggest concern is the aquifer that my water is dependent on. So just from a personal level. I also go on in my letter just to state some key points about the state law requiring zoning codes based on comprehensive plan, the plan being a backbone to zoning code, community's goals. There was a lot of effort went into the comprehensive plan. I was a little bit a part of that back in 2007 and the years prior. And developing that, the comprehensive plan has goals that are applicable to here that I highlighted in my letter, which is about discouraging intensive development. I won't read all of the letter here, but there were a number of strategies about protecting water quality, identifying critical parcels of land, and the adoption of the National Resources Protection Plan, and all of the effort that went into the open space. The OSI, the Open Space Index. So I'm going to skip a lot of the letter again. You have it already. But I want to highlight action plan or action item R2.4 from the Chapter 3 of the plan that was specifically around the Natural Resources Plan, would identify existing preserved open space, establish proposed open space preservation. Natural Resources Plan could then link to the regulatory changes such as open space development. Again, all about the open space. I do highlight a lot of that in my letter. But the key part here is the conservation subdivisions in Philipstown zoning code is as follows. The purpose is the conservation or clustered subdivisions intended to accommodate development and open space overlay while preserving natural resources and community character achieved by clustering residential units while preserving large tracts of continuous open space protected by a conservation easement. I then go on in my letter and I highlight a lot of the points that Hudson Highlands Land Trust had highlighted in their July 5th letter, supporting everything that they said, and I'm not going to repeat everything they said because they've already done that, but I support them in full. And I just want to summarize a very important point, though, the one point that they raised and I support is the configuration of the open space land and dwellings shall not result in fragmentation of the open space land in a manner that interferes with its proper management and protection of its conservation values. And then I conclude in my letter with that that this proposal does not comply with the zoning code. So I'm just going to skim through here. So I'm sorry about. I'm just going down here. So again, I'll just conclude here. I believe the property does not qualify as a conservation subdivision. According to the Philipstown zoning code, the dwellings in a conservation subdivision shall not result in fragmentation of the open space because of zoning restrictions on rural land and open space. If the project were developed as a typical subdivision, it would only have 8 or 9 houses, and we would have a better conservation outcome if it was developed as a conventional subdivision. In closing, this is the first project to seek Philipstown Planning Board approval as a conservation subdivision under the town's 2011 zoning code, and it is imperative to the town that this is done right and that it is compatible with the spirit of the 2007 comprehensive plan and that it does not set precedent for unwanted development resulting in future loss of open space indexed properties. So thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Next is Ann Hammond, Hammond, 307 East Mountain Road South.
Hi. I spent the last week and a half wading through a tiny portion of the documentation that you have been wading through for the last 2.5 years. I don't know how you do it. I'm not clear on all of the details. But what really jumped out at me is what I'm not going to go into a lot of detail because so many people have already said it may follow code, but there's no way that this is actually, in my opinion, a conservation subdivision. It seems really distasteful to me that a developer can go and buy undevelopable land and say, there, take that. Now can I have my extra spaces? I think the zoning is 3 acres per house on that side of East Mountain. I don't know what it is. I haven't gotten to the bottom of all of the code. And that's all I'll say on that. But it seems that there's a defect in the code itself because by no stretch of the imagination is it logical to count undevelopable land in your count of the land that is being conserved. You can't develop it anyway. Otherwise, it's just money. Just go buy some cheap land and say, hey, can we conserve this? I don't get that. And so I'd like to see, I'm not sure who does this, whether it's the town or the planning board, but I'd like to see a moratorium on accepting further conservation development permits until that coding has been fixed. Because I just don't think it's correct that you can count non-developable land. I'd like to see them setting aside a significant portion of the land that is developable and developable. Not even sure how to say that word. And set aside the land that is considered really desirable from a conservation standpoint. And then I do have several questions regarding details about the plan. One was touched on briefly, which is the traffic for the equestrian and event space. In the paperwork I read, I saw references to events, but I don't know what kind of events are going to be held. Will they be having competitions? Will we have 20 trucks driving up Route 9, dragging horse trailers, trying to make a turn onto the road? What if they're coming from the north and they want to turn left across Route 9? impossible. It's so hard to get out 7 days a week now. I paid attention the other day. I went out on a Sunday. I'm like, oh, it'll only take me 20 minutes to get to Wappingers. It didn't. It took 30 because there's a boatload of traffic up and down that road every day, Monday through Sunday. So what are they going to do, and what are the plans for that event space? What kind of events will they be holding? It's vast. I can't imagine they only intend to ride there themselves. And then I'm a little concerned about the residential pressure. The developer states that this will be a weekend residence. Will this be guaranteed in the homeowners association? What is that part of the permitting process? How do we know that we won't suddenly have dozens of new students at our local schools? Now, I grew up on East Mountain Road, but I've been gone for the last 30 years, and I just moved back. So I just brought 3 kids into the school district. I'm not telling you you can't bring new kids into the school district, but the developer himself has 5. What if 25 of them all have 2 to 5? That's a lot of children. Can our schools handle that? Are we ready for that, or is it guaranteed that this will be weekends only? And then there's summers. I mean, that won't put pressure on the schools, but that's a lot of people in a small area. So another question is the aquifers. It was mentioned, but I wanted to give my own personal experience. I grew up on East Mountain Road. My mom still lives there. I live there now. In the last 20 years, both of our wells have become heavily salted and mineral laden. The quality is not good. You can drink it, but you can't keep your pipes working anymore. You have to keep subbing out your copper pipes because there's so much minerals in there. It wasn't like that 25 years ago. My suspicion is that it's due to all of the increased development up the mountain, and part of it is probably also due to climate change. I don't know. But 20,000 gallons a day is a lot of water to be taking out of the watershed. I know some of it goes back in and goes through its filtration process, but it sounds unsustainable to me. I know that the creek behind my house, which feeds Clove Creek, it's dry now throughout the summer, except in the couple of days following a storm. And that wasn't the case when I was growing up here. My first 18 years, it was dry one summer for 2 weeks only. And I assure you, I was in and out of those woods every day of my life. I love them. That's why I moved home. Again, might be climate change, but it could also be the increased development already above my house. What is that going to do to Clove Creek below this development? It's a good question. And then the equine impacts. This was already mentioned, so I'll just briefly underline that if I spent $3 million on a home to live on an equestrian center, you wouldn't stop me from riding on the deer trails in the conserved land. I can't imagine that the homeowners, unless you have local homeowner police walking around, they're not going to be riding their horses where they please. Who wouldn't? That's why we move here, so we can go into the woods. At least that's why I live on East Mountain Road. Plus, my mom lives there. This does not sound like a conservation development. What it sounds like to me is a development. And they're throwing in some bones so that they can get something really juicy. It sounds like it's well done, you know. Part of this is just me. I don't really want another development in Philipstown. I know it's not my right to impede the use of someone else's properties, so I get it as a tricky thing that you guys deal with every time. But it seems like we could have something more creative with genuine conservation values here, and it seems to me like it has far more environmental impacts than all of the low to medium checkboxes that I saw on the EA statement. It seems very blithe. Oh yeah, this won't be a problem. It's already a problem at my house because we have 25 more houses above ours. What's that going to do to Clove Creek? So that's all I have to say. I feel like the questions, there are a lot of questions that haven't been answered, or the answers have been very a seal.
Thank you. Next, Susan Lowry, Lowry, 130 Horton Road.
Super quickly, because I think I'm... Hi, I live right next to the proposed development, right here. And I have 4 concerns, most of which have been addressed by the audience. Can you hear me? Okay. The aquifer, will they pay us to dig our wells deeper when they go dry? Pollution, for reasons that have been said. The traffic on Horton Road, because if you look at where the equestrian center is, which is enormous, and Horton Road, right there, Horton Road is much the fastest egress. So in any case of emergency, people are going to use that road. It would be wrong not to have emergency vehicles able to go up there. So I think it will impact Horton Road and the traffic on it. It's not a well-maintained road, and there would be a horrible situation. And lastly, and most importantly, 40 horses. I mean, on that property, and now I hear the word events. It's not sustainable for, from the point of view of waste disposal, from the point of view of people, from the point of view of even the traffic it will cause sitting in that little bowl in the middle of the forest. And so those are my 4 points. I'm not going to address is this a conservation easement? It doesn't sound like it to me, but not my area of expertise. Thank you.
Thank you. And one more, Stephanie Hawkins, 15 HAWKINS. No? Oh, she's gone?
She had to go to another meeting.
Oh, fun. Okay. So at this point, I'm going to ask the applicant to address some of the questions that were raised.
I hope somebody wrote them down. First of all, before I answer the questions, I do have a request. Will anybody in here who would deny their neighbors access for a true emergency over their road raise their hand? Anybody? Okay, and there was a purpose in that. There's been several references to the traffic we'll create on East Mountain Road. The last speaker, sorry. Every month I get yelled at about this. So there's been several references to the traffic that this subdivision will create on East Mountain Road South. There's been several references to the traffic this road would create on East Mountain Road North. There's been at least a couple of references to the traffic that this road, the most recent speaker, on Horton Hollow Road. No such thing will happen. Did I say that loud enough into the mic? No such thing will happen. We have provided that we will use the former Presenda driveway for emergency access, ingress and egress, in emergencies only, to the residents of the subdivision. We have also said in writing that we would provide emergency access only from the subdivision onto Horton Road. And that is not just for East Mountain, that's not just for the Hudson Highlands Reserve, that is for people that have to go the other way in the case of an emergency. So it's a little different, but that particular one works both ways. So the reference to the traffic that we'll generate on those roads is just an inaccurate assumption, an inaccurate conclusion. All of the traffic will be from Route 9, which I think was a little mischaracterized at one point, from Route 9 into the site, up to the equestrian center, and back.
I think the traffic that they're
No, ma'am. There was some mention of that, but that's.
So he needs, procedurally, we're not going to do a back and forth. Right. He's just going to speak.
All right.
Okay.
So with regard to the horses, we have committed that there would be no trails. We've committed to a conservation easement that would be enforceable not only by the homeowners association, who do frankly have the power to change some of the rules, but to some organization that we will find that will hold a conservation easement, and they will have enforcement powers on that. But more to the point, if you've read some of the material, and if you listen to what Mr. Lesiaga has said, this center is not for trail horses. This is for dressage horses. I don't know what dressage horses are. Show horses that see them dancing in horse shows. I don't know much about horses, but they're not trail horses that are being planned here. There's an aquifer study. There's an aquifer study produced for the town by Tim Miller Associates a number of years ago, and another one produced by Chase and Associates a number of years ago. And there's information available from governmental agencies that will let you estimate the amount of recharge that a site produces. And if you read the environmental assessment form, quoting those and using the figures in those reports, this area has a recharge of approximately 8 to 9 times the recharge that's available, that is 8 to 9 times the demand for water. The 20,000 gallons, I think it's more like 18,000 gallons, but even if it's 20, we're still something in the neighborhood of picking out 1/8 of the recharge for that particular amount of water. This land will not be accessed. Mr. Lyons did build that driveway, and Mr. Lyons had a septic permit. It's to say he didn't is an inaccurate statement. This land will not be touched, period. The land, and I think that the characterization, I was on one of the zoning committees that looked at the new zoning, and I was probably the devil's advocate for most of it, but when it came to why do we need a conservation subdivision in those committee meetings when we have steep lands and regulating? Well, the answer is by those people who were zoning can be changed, and a conservation easement takes an act of a legislature to make it different. So the fact that the steep land is protected by zoning, the conservation adds a different level and a permanent level of protection that can't be, well, it's overstatement. It can be overturned, but it takes an act of the legislature to overturn it. The political climate changes in town. Those in town who are enacting the laws, the town board, that political climate change, they would have the power to change the zoning to put it to half-acre zoning or to put it to cluster zoning. I don't think they would. I don't think we have anybody that would consider that. But the fact is, they could, and the fact is that the idea of a conservation subdivision was sold on at least in part, on the idea that steep lands needed even more protection, and the idea that someone would posture that adding steep lands to increase the yield, well, it certainly increased the yield here, but it also adds a level of protection that the whole idea of that conservation subdivision was promulgating and said was necessary to protect the steep slopes. And if we're protecting more steep slopes, in my view, we're fulfilling that obligation. I think, frankly, it was unfair to bring that sort of analogy into the, or that sort of scenario, rather, into the subdivision, into the conversation. The lake, it said here the lake was not protected. The lake has 100-foot regulated buffer that we must respect. That's in the law. We've added a 40-foot buffer. If you look at some of the literature that's out there to protect from nutrients from running into the lake, you need 125. We got more than that. Not only that, there are restrictions that are discussed in the EAF with regard to the size of the lawns and limitations on fertilizer that will be imposed on the homeowners that are around the lake. Not only that, but we are collecting the sewage from the houses so that it will be transported away from the lake and put into a common septic system. That common septic system will have one big advantage. It has to be maintained. It has to be professionally maintained. The septic tank has to be emptied and taken away, and the systems will work better. How many of you know full well that you've gone more than the 2 years that you're allowed, that recommended to have your septic tank pumped out? We have enough experience in my office to know that an awful lot of problems are caused by people who don't bother to do it. This common septic system will be professionally maintained, and they'll be reporting to the state and the health department with regard to the proper maintenance of that. And not only that, the homeowners association will be charged with managing that whole process. There's been a couple of different questions with regard to the equestrian center. I'm afraid I'd have to sit down and count the parking. I don't know that answer. In saying that the horse manure would be spilled on the ground and it would wash into the lake. The fact is that was been answered in the EAF as well. There is a manure collection station. There is a roll-off container that has a tarp on top of it, and it has a building over it into which the manure from the barn and from the paddocks is scooped up and delivered and put into the container, and the container is then taken off the site and brought to a place where it can be properly disposed of. That includes the urine-soaked bedding in the stables. And the schedule is not every day. The schedule is probably once a week, but it's got an 11-day capacity in the system. So that particular thing has been answered. The average, if you take 25 into 210 or 205, the average lot is over 15. So, no, maybe it's not. Maybe I'll correct myself on that. I'd be happy to be reminded of any other questions that were here, and maybe I'll give Steve Gross a chance to answer some of them.
For those of you who don't know me, my name is Steve Gross. I'm the principal of Hudson Highlands Environmental Consulting. I'm an environmental planner by training, and I've been doing this for 40 years. I know I don't look that old, but I am. Most of my career has been sitting where you guys are. Most of my career has been representing neighborhood groups, environmental groups, opposing bad developments. I've worked for the Sterling Forest Partnership. I've worked for the New York, New Jersey Trail Conference, for the Stewart Park and Reserve Coalition. I've worked for land trusts. I've had a lot of different, and a lot of neighborhood groups and whatever. I am so happy to be working with a developer that wants to do things right. This is a conservation subdivision. One of the things that you have to realize is what Glenn was talking about, is that zoning regulations, steep slopes regulations, wetlands regulations do not completely preserve land. Steep slope laws and wetland laws are permissive. In other words, you can get a permit to fill in wetlands, to develop in buffers. You can get permits to cross steep slopes. Currently, also, the other thing to realize is that if this land was to be subdivided and someone comes in, there's a deduction that you have to make for constrained lands. According to the zoning code, the deduction you have to make is 25% of the land that is occupied by wetlands and streams. There is no deduction for steep slopes. But with the conservation subdivision, when we calculate how many units were allowed, there is a major deduction that when someone was saying, oh, you could just buy up land and then take the credit for that land for units. We had to buy 4 times as much land for how much you're going to claim credit for, because there's a 75% deduction for steep slopes, wetlands, watercourses, cemeteries. There's a whole long list of things you have to deduct for, and it's 75%. You only get a quarter credit for any of the lands that are under those constraints. So right off the bat, like for instance, this is a 50-acre parcel that the applicant purchased for the sole purpose of conserving. The original proposal started here and was up in this portion, and he's been buying land and adding it on, but you can see how much is steep slope. There's a stream and a wetland coming down through here. The credit that he received for this additional land was very small compared to the benefit of putting it aside. Another piece that he acquired in the process of this, Clove Creek has been mentioned. Well, Clove Creek is just barely on the property over here, and it's mostly off the property. You can see we're not developing anywhere near Clove Creek, except for this entrance road. Well, the entrance road was going to cut close to Clove Creek. This applicant decided to buy the parcel next door that has an existing commercial building on it for the sole purpose, the only purpose, was to move the entrance farther away from Clove Creek. He wasn't crossing Clove Creek. He was just getting near it. But he purchased this parcel just to move it further away. I love working for this client. There's been a lot of talk about, you see the brown line here, and people were assuming, well, that was an entrance. It's not an entrance. That brown line is another thing that when I got involved with this, we identified as being something worthy of conserving. That is the original roadway that went through the property, dates back about 200 years, possibly more, maybe 250. It is stone-lined. There's a barn down over here that dates back to somewhere between, we dated it between 1810 and 1825. That's being preserved. And the original thought when this was being laid out as a subdivision was, well, use the old road. We'll pave that and we'll put houses on either side. When I brought the concept to this client, hey, what do you think of the idea of preserving that with the stone walls in its natural state and letting that be a linear park behind the houses? He loved it. And so that's what you see now. This is not an entranceway. In fact, I don't even think it's an emergency entranceway. Yeah. Okay, but is there going to be a connection? Okay, I wasn't even aware of that, but I'm assuming it's going to be gated. Yeah. It'll be gated, okay. The same thing over here. There's an existing road here at the end of Horton. There will be a locked gate across that road. It will not be an entranceway. There will be no traffic on Horton Road. There'll be a lock on it for emergency purposes. That doesn't mean that if there's a fire over here that the trucks are going to come up here to put out the fire. This is clearly going to be the better road to come up because it's going to be designed for modern standards compared to the way Horton Road is. More importantly, this will be an emergency access for residents of Horton Road. You already had a bridge washout on one of the roads in this neighborhood. If there was a tree that fell across the road, if there was a fire, anything that blocked Horton Road, you currently don't have a way out. This would provide an emergency access to get out of Horton Road. It's going to be the more important purpose of having that emergency access than anything that would occur going the other way. What else do I want to say?
Can I interrupt you for just 1 second, Steve?
Yes.
Is there anything that Glenn covered those things? So is there anything Glenn didn't cover that you feel needs, that was a question?
I want to reiterate on Omar Pond. We have a letter that we just received today that we're submitting to the board tonight. We had a limnologist that had originally looked at this and done an assessment of it for the conservation analysis. We went back to that limnologist. He had made several recommendations I think you're all familiar with. And we hadn't gone back to him until just this week, and we said, could you take a look at the plans that we've developed with the measures that we have installed or we're proposing to install for the protection of Omar Pond and give us an assessment. He looked at that. First thing he said was, well, maybe not the first thing, but one of the things he said was, well, I was concerned about septic systems around the lake. You've removed that. You're piping it all the way to a common septic field. That's great. He said that goes beyond the recommendation that he had made. Glenn already mentioned the 140 feet buffer exceeds the recommended buffer that he had of 125 feet. Glenn also talked about the manure management plan. I just want to reiterate there that the storage for that is going to be, there's going to be an impermeable concrete pad that this roll-off container is going to be on. And as Glenn said, that'll have a roof over it so that it can't even receive any rain. So there's no way. We also, in one of the submissions we made to the board, we included a little picture of a cart because while the horses are outside in the paddock, if they produce any manure, it's going to be immediately picked up in this little cart, immediately picked up, and deposited into the roll-off container. So there will be no manure on the ground at any time. I know, it's funny. I see you laughing back there. But there'll be no manure on the ground at any time getting into runoff, getting into the pond or anywhere. And it will be removed once a week. I'm trying to remember any other issues that were brought up. What's that?
Feed trips are similarly not daily.
The feed being brought in. Yeah, feed, I believe the capacity for the feed storage is going to be a full month, from what I remember. So they'll the feed will be brought in basically 12 times a year. The manure is going to be taken off once a year. Aquifer. It's already been mentioned that this is a Clove Creek aquifer, which is probably the highest producing water supplier in the town. People surrounding that have wells into that aquifer don't have to worry. This produces so much water, it will have no off-site impact. I can guarantee you that. The other thing to realize is that with having the recharge on site, yes.
Excuse me, sorry. So you've been going for about 7 or 8 minutes now.
Yeah.
And I think you're moving into further territory that's already been covered.
Well, let me make the one point I was just about to make. Since there will be recharge on site and the wastewater is not being taken off with the sewer system to be treated in the sewage treatment plant, water consumed will equal wastewater produced. So any water that's taken out of the aquifer will be treated on site and put back into the aquifer, so it'll be equal. So there won't be any depletion of the aquifer. So I don't know if there was anything else that was brought up to be addressed.
It's 8 minutes after 9 now, and we still have other things on the agenda. So, yep.
There were a couple of people with comments that were questioning or asking about what kind of events. And I'm curious myself on that and what kind of input or.
Thank you, everyone. I have to admit that I love democracy. This is great. Having everyone come and give their input and their ideas and their own questions and concerns. And I think this is what builds a great project. I applaud your interest. I am an interested person in everything that I'm, so I applaud and I welcome and I thank you for your valuable input. Thank you to the board for working with us for the last 4 years on this. It has been a long road, and I think in a way this is a little bit unfair for the general public because they are not privy to all the work that has gone on for 4 years. We have engaged the services of 13 consultants, including a town how can I call you? That like Glenn Watson is. I see him every.
Well, we appreciate your background information. Certainly, that's helpful. But if we maybe get to that a little later. I think the question right now was about the events that may be held. If we could get to that issue.
I'm stealing 2 minutes to just thank everyone. But there are no events whatsoever. I don't know where that came from. The idea of this equestrian facility, I grew up horseback riding. My 5 children, like someone knows, they all are horseback riders. My daughter was 6th in the nation last year in Kentucky. I'm very proud of her.
Yeah, I think we have our answer. There are
the horse.
There are no events. Right?
No events.
Okay.
No events. All right. So.
Okay. Good.
But I would love to clarify the nature of the facility. I would love to clarify.
I understand. We've been here since 7 o'clock.
Okay.
No
trails. No people are going to. So these horses are worth millions of dollars. I'm not exaggerating. So no one will go on steep slopes with these horses. They. Yeah. Thank you.
The remaining question that was not answered was, there was a comment made, how are you going to stop people from taking the horse and driving or riding up into areas that were not supposed to be ridden? It's a fair question, but I think you also have to answer it truthfully. 2 things. First of all, this whole project will be the subject of a homeowners association approved by the New York State Attorney General's office. All of the budgeting with regard to the environmental measures have to pass muster. That's number 1. Number 2, insofar as the restrictions are concerned, those restrictions are going to be part and parcel of any approval that is granted and obviously enforced. When you have a facility or you have a development that will have an investment of over $25 million in it, and people are subscribing and agreeing to abide by those rules, under that set of circumstances, if you're told you can't ride your $1 million horse up into the woods, as crazy as it might sound, you wouldn't ride the horse, first of all, but secondly, you're forbidden from giving that. Is anybody here a golfer? I play golf. I play golf on golf courses where there are areas where if I hit the ball, I can't walk in there to get the ball because it's an environmentally constrained area. So too, if you have a set of rules, and people pay $30,000 a year to belong to those clubs. So if you're making an investment of $2 or $3 million in buying a house and into this concept, quite frankly, I think I've given you the answer.
Yes, you
You're not going to ride the horse.
Thank you. Any other questions from the board?
Give you respond to comments that Steve mentioned. I'll pass them out.
You don't have any personal comments to mention about your golfing habits, your horse riding habits, your love of the owner, any other personal information you want to share, Glenn?
My biggest hobby is dealing with planning boards.
Here's your chance.
Oh, I know.
Self-proclaimed. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. So, given that there are no more comments from the board, I'd like to ask Ron if he has any comments.
No, I mean, I'm sorry. Thank you. I think the goal of this process has been to collect public comment. It's probably appropriate for the board to now consider whether you wish to close the public hearing. You also have your planner with you tonight. They could probably discuss next steps, which would include that workshop meeting for the March meeting.
Okay. So, would anyone like to, Steve, do you have any comments for us?
No, I think it's appropriate to close the public hearing at this time. You might want to hear from Graham on that issue before you actually make a decision, but that aside, I think that's the next step in the process.
Thank you.
Just a 10-second comment.
I don't go.
That's okay. And that is, I just want for the record to confirm the fact that what has been handed up to the planning board is a document dated February 15, 2018, which is response to comments received at the public hearing on January 18, 2018, together with a letter from one of our consultants, the limnologist that examined Ulmer Pond. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Graham Trelstead from AKRF, here for the Town Planning Board. I guess the question is next steps in the process. Obviously, as Mr. Gavin and Mr. Gaynor pointed out, it's your discretion to close the public hearing tonight. I don't believe we heard anything new that would require keeping the public hearing open. You do have the option, of course, to have a written comment period extend for a number of days. I think that given that the next step in the process is the determination of significance under SECRA, we should prepare ourselves for that work session next month and be prepared to do that. Obviously, you may still have some questions. I'll be here for that, but we should be prepared at that meeting to move forward on a determination of significance. That would allow you to either take the next steps in the SECRA process or to end the SECRA process and allow you to then move on to the consideration of the application and the determination on that application.
Okay. Thank you. Does anybody have questions for Graham? No?
Thank you, Graham.
Excuse me,
Do you think
Glenn.
30 minutes is enough?
Excuse me?
The workshop length. Oh, the workshop length?
Do we think 30 minutes is enough?
Yeah, well, that was my question about the one that was canceled.
Neil, do you have
So
an opinion?
I raised a similar, related question to Steve via email as per when I asked what the agenda was for the workshop, and I think it does matter what are we trying to capture or accomplish in that period. If it is a narrowly construed discussion about what is the criteria for SECRA, positive or negative, which I believe was the definition of the workshop, then I do personally, I think a half hour is suitable, maybe a little tight. If we have a broader conversation about, I don't know what else, but many other topics, half hour is woefully insufficient. So I think it depends on what we are, my opinion, depends on what we are defining as the topic of said workshop. Okay. So see, that was the intent of my question about what was the agenda.
Well, if I could speak to that for just a second. The workshop, in my opinion, wasn't so much to get into the merits of the application that they put in vis-a-vis whether it is a positive declaration or negative declaration. It was to lay the groundwork for this board's consideration of the substantive issues in environmental review, which would be reviewed in the course of your regular meeting, which would start at 7:30. So we would meet at 7. We would discuss, what it is you look at in order to make a positive declaration or a negative declaration, perhaps in broad brush strokes, talk about, what the issues might be here and how those should be reviewed. And then at 7:30, could be in the meeting, the regular meeting. There isn't really a lot of difference between a workshop meeting and a regular meeting. I know this board holds workshops that are separate and apart from full board meetings, but then deal with it substantively. If the board wants to push it back and hold an hour workshop before the regular meeting, maybe put a little more meat on the bone, that's fine with me, whatever it is that suits you. But that was the idea behind the half hour.
So does anyone have an opinion about half an hour, an hour? No?
My opinion would be Steve, what you said, I would actually, if you struck the broad brushstrokes of our perspectives of the particulars of this application, if only we talked about the criteria as is emboldened in state law and in statute, I think a half hour is sufficient. If we start talking about the merits or demerits of the application related to that, I think the half hour is not going to be enough.
It's your workshop, whatever the board's pleasure is, we'll certainly shop.
No, I agree with Neil's statement. If we're going to really get into other details regarding this, that a half hour is going to be very tight.
Right. So the purpose, from what I understand Steve was saying, is that the purpose, really the next step, and what Graham said, is the determination of significance in seeker. So if that's what we're going to stick to, then I think a half an hour, it might go over a little bit, but a half an hour is probably fine. If that's what we'd like to do, that's fine. I'm not sure that discussing the broader piece is appropriate before we make a decision about seeker. Does that make sense to everybody? So I would make a motion to keep it a half an hour and have it be this broad stroke approach that we've discussed.
I would just be slightly more precise in what we're saying the workshop is, which is to discuss the regulations, laws, and statutes related to SECRA as related to our decision we have to make, as opposed to anything related to Hudson Highland Reserve's application. That's my opinion. I don't know about others.
Okay. So, shall we vote on that? Or you want to make that motion that we did?
We already have the meeting planned.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure if it's
So we're all in
necessary.
agreement. I just want to make sure we're all in agreement. Are we in agreement?
Basically, the determination.
Okay. So in answer to your question, Glenn, half an hour.
I just wanted you to know you thought about the length of the time it's taking.
Okay. Okay.
So motion to close the public hearing then, or not, or?
I have a question.
One last question. It's pretty late.
Okay, well,
Come stand, got to come and stand at the mic here and give your name again.
Well, I mean, I don't need to ask my question now if the public hearing remains open, but if it's going to be closed, then I want some things
I don't
addressed.
know, we're going to vote on that next, so you might as well just ask it now.
Okay. So, Richard Butensky. I understand that this is a particular type of equestrian with particular types of horses, but I'm wanting to know if this land is truly constrained. As my understanding is that that horses, if forget about this gentleman's plan, but obviously it'll become the homeowners association that will decide in the future what this becomes. It may always stay this, it may become something else. The homeowners have the right to decide how they want to use it, and the only thing that constrains them will be actual laws and actual constraints that are set on this property. So it's really, to me, it's immaterial what type of horses they are or that sort of thing. What I'd like to know is if these horses, there's a facility that's going to be built for 40 horses. If those 40 horses are not just indoor horses, and actually I don't understand how even indoor type horses don't get,
You got a question?
Yeah.
One question.
I want to
Not
know,
editorial.
where is this land actually forbidden in any way for some future use, whether these horses use it or not? I mean, it may be forbidden by the homeowners association now, but if it changes.
So let's have an answer from Mr. O'Rourke, and we'll.
The answer is yes, it's forbidden, because the planning board has the authority to place conditions upon any kind of an approval, and if in fact the representations that have been made throughout these proceedings call for this area not to be allowed or traversed by horses, that's a condition of an approval. If there is a violation of that, first of all, it's a violation of the homeowners association, and you don't change that readily. And secondly, insofar as any condition, that certainly is enforceable by the town. Code enforcement officer, third party, code enforcement officer sees a horse up there. Quite frankly,
The code
there's a
allows there
violation.
to be a horse up there.
No, but if
Okay,
they, but they don't.
I think we're done here. Quickly, Glenn. You know,
There's a
what,
more direct answer to his question.
yeah?
This subdivision requires that a conservation easement be placed on that property. The conservation easement is held either by a municipal organization or by a environmental organization qualified to hold it. They have enforcement rights separate and absolutely apart from the property owners and the homeowners association, and they can enforce it.
Okay. So, there we go. Now, I have two questions for the board. One is, do we want to continue to take public comment, written public comment, for a few days after tonight? Or do we want to close the public hearing and be done with all comment? Yes, Neil?
My view is there was a substantive amount of commentary tonight and a substantive amount of response from the applicant. And I believe that it would be in our best interest, in the public's best interest, to retain the opening of the public hearing until such time as when we return in this setting after the workshop, that if anybody from this group has further questions that the direct responses did not clarify, they have one last opportunity to ask them.
Okay. Okay, and how does the board feel about that? Oh, okay, so make a motion, is that a motion?
We need a motion to keep it open?
Yeah.
Says Steve, yes.
Okay, I would like to make a motion to keep the public hearing open.
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. So that's it for the Hudson Highlands Reserve for tonight. Please quietly exit so we can get on to our further business. Thank you for coming.
Can you, Ann or Kim, can you tell us what's remaining on the agenda, please?
Yeah, sure. So,
Oh, thank you. Oh, just Surprise Lake? Oh, my.
please exit quietly and quickly. Thank you. What's your question? So, we have next Surprise Lake Road. Surprise Lake Camp, 382 Surprise Lake Road. Thank you for waiting. Thank you for your patience. Come on up.
That's poor guy. Poor guy. Got any cookies for us again? Those are pretty good. Oh, all right. Well, you should have just taken the credit and ran.
Good night, Graham. Thank you. What do you need?
She wanted a letter.
Oh,
She's
oh,
got it.
oh, okay. Here, I'm going to give you more of these because it's the only way to stay awake.
Glenn, you better have a personal anecdote for next time. I need something.
Football.
Yeah, football.
Football would be fun.
Favorite glass of wine, just something. Give us something, Glenn.
Hi.
Good evening. My name's Rich Williams. I'm with Insight Engineering. We're the site civil engineers for Surprise Lake Camp. We've been before you, so what I'll do is I'll just summarize what we've resubmitted to this board and talk to you for a couple of minutes about what we've done since we were last before you and since we met in the field. With the latest submission, we updated the environmental assessment form. We provided a fire truck maneuvering plan, which was something we discussed at the site walk. And that plan shows how a fire truck could maneuver through the site. We also provided a preliminary stormwater pollution prevention plan and responded to the outstanding engineering comments. We also met with this board as well as the Conservation Board in the field. Both your board and the Conservation Board conducted site walks. As this board may recall, there is an easement that is held by New York State Parks over the property. I'm happy to report that we forwarded the application to New York State Parks. They attended the Conservation Board site walk, and they have provided comments to this board, which we received a copy of today and we will address. I believe the comments are minor in nature and very addressable. We've also attended the Conservation Board meeting this past Tuesday, in which a conditional wetland permit was issued. We're waiting for the conditions of the approval to be formally given to us, and then we'll respond to those. Some of the highlights are we are going to be reaching out to the New York State DEC for a non-jurisdictional determination because we believe there's the potential presence for the timber rattlesnake. It's likely that by the time we are done with that non-jurisdictional determination, we'll have a timber rattlesnake monitoring plan. The staff at the camp is trained in poisonous snake identification and removal. And that staff is on site full time, and that's actually in part because it is a camp and safety comes first. The only substantial layout change I'm going to point out, and we discussed this at the planning board, is the seat walls along Lakeside were extended. We previously had a shorter arrangement. The camp wanted it to be elongated a little bit to be able to fit more campers in. We've recently emailed the deed for the property as well as the no violation letter from the building department. We emailed them to the town engineer, but we will formally provide copies to Department of Planning tomorrow. We also emailed to Mr. Gaynor today a project narrative, and I'll just briefly summarize some of the facts in that, all of which have been discussed with the board. 465-acre property.
Sorry, can I interrupt you one second? Excuse me, folks in the kitchen, the hallway acts like a megaphone, so we can hear you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry.
So just to give you a bit of the camp operation, it operates in 2 sessions. The first is from the end of June until July, and then from July until Labor Day. There's 400 campers per session. Each session has a drop-off and pickup day. And again, we talked about this in the field and last time, where the families come in the morning for personal drop-off, buses arrive in the afternoon, and on average, the camp gets 4 to 6 visitors a day. That basically summarizes the project narrative that we'll formally submit. That being said, I'm really here for any questions you may have or comments that you guys have from the sidewalk.
So I'm going to have Ron tell us a little bit, and then we'll ask our questions.
Sure. As was indicated, the application is still incomplete, but the design engineers actually transmitted to us and is committed to delivering tomorrow to the town hall the property deed and no violations letter that's necessary in order for you to deem the application complete. Likewise, the project narrative, which I have not yet seen, but you indicate has been transmitted, that should be delivered as well for the town's record so that the entire board can see it. That would then resolve the issue of completeness for the board's decision. With respect to seeker, it's an unlisted action. You obviously can do a coordinated or uncoordinated review. You indicate that the Conservation Board has already acted?
Yeah, I believe they issued a conditional wetland permit on Tuesday. I believe this board did declare their intent to be lead agency at the last meeting, at the last planning board meeting.
Oh, okay, that I was not aware of. Okay. So I don't know if the formal documents for the coordinated review had been issued, but if the Conservation Board was aware of it and has actually acted, it somewhat becomes moot. The referrals that are necessary relate to the Putnam County Department of Planning. The board had also requested that they be referred to the local fire department. Just this past week, I've worked directly again with the design engineer, and those referrals have actually been issued at this point. So I can tell you that they're now out. Putnam County Planning has them in their hands. So they'll likely respond before your next meeting. We're still reviewing the SWIP document. I expect to have those comments out very shortly, but they'll trail tonight. And then there's minor technical issues that we've identified in our letter. And it's really a matter for the board to recognize that the application is complete upon the filing of those few documents I mentioned. And then you might want to consider scheduling a public hearing for a future meeting day.
So are those documents forthcoming pretty soon?
The deed was originally actually emailed to Tara at Planning on December 18th, but we will formally submit them tomorrow. We will bring copies.
Okay. So if we get them tomorrow, then we could,
You can just conditionally acknowledge that the application can be deemed complete upon the receipt of those documents,
and then we could schedule a public hearing for next month.
if you wish.
Yeah. We've done a site visit.
Oh, I thought it got scrubbed, it went?
No, that was Jamie
This one
Copeland that got scrubbed. Yeah, yeah, or rather that nobody came to. So what do we think about scheduling a public hearing for next month? Oh, I'm playing with it, I'm sorry. I'm not used to having it, sorry. Okay, so I'd like to ask for a motion to schedule a public hearing provided the documents are received so that we can deem the application complete. Who would like to make that motion?
I'll make that motion.
Thanks, David. And second?
I'll second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
I vote aye. Any opposed? No.
One proviso, as the schedule's put together, I'd suggest we do that first, like we did tonight.
Yes. And so that'll have to be noticed in the paper once so Tara will get that information. Okay. Is there anything else I'm missing, Steve?
Well, maybe Ron, you want to bring that up?
Which one?
The Peck Eiler matter?
The what?
Peck Eiler.
No, I mean about this.
Oh, on this? No.
No, so this is good. So,
Thank you very much.
thank you. Oh, I did have one question, which is I read through the stuff that Parks sent, and I'm hoping that you're in agreement with them about the kinds of plastic or non-plastic filtering
With respect to the jute mesh, right? I believe that's what you're referring to.
with respect to the drainage.
Yeah,
or
the erosion control
The erosion control,
materials.
that's the word I was
Yeah.
looking for.
They were talking,
The netting.
right.
Yes, yeah, we can accommodate that comment.
And I do actually have one other question, which is, when we were on this site visit, the fellow who's the caretaker said that he had stockpiled the fill from the pool. And I was wondering how that related to the concerns that the people from State Parks had about seeds.
I have to be very candid. I have to look into it more.
Okay.
We have 4 licensed landscape architects on staff. I'm an engineer. I'm a BE. It's not my purview, my area of expertise, but we're going to be on it. We are going to respond to this board as well as to Parks for all the comments that they issued to us.
Great. Thank you. Okay. So the next thing on our agenda is Jamie Copeland, who is not here. We had a site visit, but Peter went, and then I was late, and I missed him, and Jamie didn't go. So I think we need to reschedule this site visit with the applicant so that we know that everybody will be there. And since he's not here now, I'm not sure how that happens. What do we do? Ann, what's your experience with that?
I think we can't do anything.
You can actually contact him. You get a date right now between yourselves, or
Okay.
you wait.
So what would we like to do? Should we pick a date for a site visit? Or should we wait, ask Jamie when he can do it, just in case he doesn't come? Should we pick a date? Okay. So how about the 25th?
February?
Mm-hmm. Okay, how about this Sunday, the No, that's not enough time. We have to notice it, right? So, March 4th?
March 4th would be fine.
Just 'cause I can't do it.
Can't do that one either.
No, I'm saying just because I can't make the 25th doesn't mean,
Well, I've been there, and Peter's been there.
yeah, I know the building too, so I don't.
March 11th.
March 11th is right before our next meeting. How about March 11th?
Sure, that's good.
Sure? Okay. 9:30?
Sure.
All right.
I'm going to make one suggestion that our board secretary send out a notification via email, maybe the Friday before she, and in future, if it's ever a he, reminds said board members, because I think we all have a spotty track record of recalling, and then how often are we then calling each other?
True.
Minutes? Where are you? What time zone is it? I'm not calling anyone out because I'm just as guilty, but
Sounds good.
could you, it would just be helpful. I feel like that would be.
Excellent. And to that end, does everybody, this is a piece of housekeeping. Is everybody using their philipstown.com email now?
What?
Okay. So Tara, I asked Tara if we were all using our philipstown.com email, and she thought that everybody was, but it sounds like not everybody has access to theirs. Peter, you don't have access?
I get
You use both.
and my own.
You have access? You just haven't used it. David, do you have access? Do you have a password?
I had one at one time. I don't know.
So it would be really good if before the next meeting, we could all sync up with that and start using that. Contact Tara and she'll give you all your information that you need. It would be good to finally get on board with that. I don't want to use it, but we have to, so there you go. Is that it? Steve, you wanted to talk about Peck Eiler.
Just briefly, I sent out that memo to everybody, and they've been held up for a little while. I think the next thing to do is ask the fire department what they think of the road, give you guys a leg up. It would be nice if we had authority to ask them to do that.
Okay, so we need to write a letter, direct the secretary to write a letter for Andy to sign.
Yeah, well, I think Ron would take care of that, no?
Yeah, it'll go right out. Right.
So would anybody like to make a motion that we have Ron send a letter to the fire department?
So moved.
Second?
Is it also acceptable?
Peck Eiler.
Also acceptable to release it to the
John
applicant?
Lake Celeste.
Release Steve's letter to the applicant. He has not yet seen it.
Yeah, it's up to you whether you want to waive privilege and send it to them or not.
Peck
I don't have a problem with it if you want to. But it's your
Do we
decision.
want to release Steve's letter about it to the applicant?
Sure.
Yeah?
Seems, I mean, why not?
Okay, okay.
Thank you.
So that's part of this motion. We have a second on that motion? All in favor? Aye.
I didn't get that, I'm sorry. I didn't get the.
Okay, so, who made the motion? Neil.
Oh.
And Neil Tillman made the second, I believe.
Release the letter, yes.
Okay, to release the letter and to send,
Adjourn the meeting?
no, to send a letter for Ron to send a letter to the fire department about it. Okay, that was all part of the same.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, all right, so anybody want to make a motion to adjourn? Second.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Thank you all.
I just need you to sign.